Imagine you're sitting across from someone you care about, or maybe they're sizing you up on a date or in a group chat, and suddenly you feel a subtle pressure. It's as if they've thrown an invisible puzzle at you, a question, a pause, a look. You feel tested. Let me tell you, those moments are less about you passing or failing and more about showing up as wholly yourself. As human, as someone who sees the test, laughs inwardly, and chooses presence. There's this moment that happens in almost every relationship, romantic, professional, even in a friendship, when you suddenly realize you're being measured. Not in an obvious way like someone holding up error, but in the quiet, invisible ways people test each other. It might be a question that's laced with just enough edge to see how you respond. It might be a silence that stretches longer than it should, or a playful tease that's designed to gauge whether you'll laugh along or get defensive. These moments sneak up on us and they carry more weight than we realize. Because beneath the surface, they aren't just about what we do in that second. They're about the stories we've been telling ourselves for years about who we are and how we think we need to show up. When you're put in any of these little tests of confidence, it's not just about confidence at all. It's about narrative, about the script you have been carrying, often without knowing it, and how tightly you're holding on to it. If your story says, I have to be perfect to be loved, then the slightest tease might feel like a threat, and you'll snap back in irritation. If your story says, I don't belong here, then a pause in the conversation might spiral into panic about being rejected. And if your story says, I'm solid enough to weather awkwardness, then you'll sit in that silence with a kind of ease that feels magnetic. We're all narrators of our lives, but the tricky part is we're unreliable ones. We exaggerate certain details. We cut out others. We cast ourselves in roles we didn't audition for, but accepted anyway. Some of us write ourselves as the hero who has to keep proving himself, others as the underdog who's always fighting to be seen, others as the comic relief who makes sure nobody notices the fear beneath the laughter. And when someone tests your confidence, what they're really doing is tugging at the edges of that script, trying to see what's underneath. Think about a time when the psychology of female testimonial said something to you that stung a little. Not outright cruel, but sharp. Enough to feel like a probe. Maybe it was a date teasing you about your job or your style, or a colleague questioning whether you knew what you were talking about. What was your first instinct? Did you feel the need to puff up to prove them wrong? To make a big show of how unbothered you were? Or did you shrink, laugh it off too quickly, give away more ground than you intended? Those reactions weren't random. They came straight from the story you've been telling yourself all along. Confidence tests are never really about the other person. They're about you. They expose the gap between the story you're telling and the truth you're living. A man who believes deep down that he isn't enough will try to cover it with bravado or retreat into silence. A man who has learned that being seen in his imperfection is safe, won't need to perform at all. And that's what makes him magnetic. Not because he's flawless, but because he's real. One of the quiet tragedies I see is how often we cling to the wrong story, mistaking it for armor. We think if we just hold it tight enough, nobody will see through us. But irony is people always see the story leaks out in the way you laugh a little too loud, the way you avoid eye contact when asked something direct, the way you rush to fill silence as though it is dangerous, and the more you fight to control how you're seen, the more fragile you become. Because confidence doesn't live in control. It lives in surrender and letting yourself be known without scripting every response. When Simeon tests you, what they're really doing is handing you an opportunity. They're inviting you to notice the story you've been clinging to and decide if it still serves you. Imagine someone makes a playful jab at you in front of others. You could get defensive. Make it into a duel. and prove that you won't be messed with. That's one story. Or you could laugh in a way that shows you're in on the joke, but also steady enough not to be thrown. That's another story. The first comes from fear. The second comes from freedom. And the test, though it feels like it's about impressing them, is really about revealing to yourself which story you're still living in. The beauty of these moments is that they give us a mirror. Not the polished kind we curate for selfies, but the raw one we catch in unexpected places. The shop window that reveals how tense our shoulders are. The reflection in a friend's eyes when we've said something sharp out of insecurity. These are mirrors that don't flatter, but they do tell the truth. And when someone tests you, you get to decide whether to double sneaky test number one, reveal down on the image you've been projecting, or soften into the person you really are. The irony is people are less interested in whether you pass or fail, and more interested in whether they can feel you. Can they feel that you represent even if you stumble? Can they feel that you aren't afraid of your own flaws? Can they feel that your sense of worth isn't hanging on the single exchange? That's the kind of confidence that can't be faked, because it's not about being the loudest or the sharpest in the room. It's about being unshaken by the possibility of not being liked in every moment. Sometimes when we talk about confidence, people imagine this grand cinematic thing like standing tall while fireworks go off in the background. But real confidence is quieter. It's the ability to sit in silence without rushing to fix it. It's the courage to say, I don't know, without spiraling into shame. It's that presence to take a tease with a smile because you know it doesn't define you. And these sneaky little tests, they're ageist opportunities to practice that quiet courage. Here's the paradox. The more you try to pass every test, the more you fail them. Because the very act of performing is the giveaway. True confidence isn't about rehearsing the perfect response. It's about trusting yourself enough to respond in the moment. The tests stop feeling like traps when you realize they're simply states where your real self is invited to step forward. But stepping forward requires letting go of the stories that don't serve you. And that's where it gets uncomfortable, because those stories, even if they hurt us, are familiar. They've been our companions for years. They tell us, at least this way, you know who you are. But what if who you are is bigger than the story you've been rehearsing? What if the test isn't meant to trip you up, but to wake you up? In every relationship, we are both storytellers and listeners. We tell stories about who we are, and we listen somatize too closely to the stories others reflect back at us. When someone teases you or pushes to see how you'll respond, they're not just looking for wit or charm. They're looking for congruence. Does the story you tell about yourself align with the way you live in the moment? If there's a gap, they'll feel it, and so will you. So maybe the real question isn't how do I pass the test? Maybe it's what story am I living out right now? And is it the one I want to keep telling? That shift from external approval to internal awareness changes everything. Suddenly the silence doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like space. The tease doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like play. The delay in reply doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like an opportunity to rest in yourself. And that is what confidence really is. The ability to rest in yourself no matter what. What I know is this. People remember how you make them feel. And they sense whether you're grounded in your own story or scrambling to uphold them that's crumbling. Passing the test isn't about impressing anyone. It's about aligning with yourself so deeply that no test has the power to undo you. Because in the end, the only story worth telling is the one that allows you to show up fully unguarded, unpolished, but unmistakably real. And isn't that kind of story worth living? We spend so much of our lives trying to convince people of who we are. Sometimes we do it how to respond with calm confidence, be exaggerating, by puffing ourselves up, by putting on a show. Other times, We do it by shrinking, by hiding parts of ourselves, by playing small so nobody notices how much we're trembling inside. Either way, it's still acting, it's still a performance. And the problem with a performance is that it always has an audience, which means you're constantly measuring yourself against how you think they're perceiving you instead of simply being with them. That's why so many of us confuse confidence with performance. We imagine it looks like walking into a room with a perfect smile, shaking hands firmly, making eye contact, just long enough to signal strength, but not long enough to seem intimidating. We think it's about saying the clever line at the right minute, never hesitating, never second guessing. But the truth is, when you're acting confident, you're not confident at all. You're managing perception. You're keeping your eyes on the audience instead of listening to your own voice. Real confidence isn't an act. It's not about making sure nobody sees you sweat. It's about not minding if they do. It's about knowing that even if your voice shakes, you're still grounded in yourself. It's not the absence of self-doubt. It's the acceptance of it. Confidence isn't I'm uncheckable. It's I'll be okay even if I shake. Think of a time when you were trying really hard to impress someone. Maybe it was a first date, maybe an interview, maybe meeting your partner's family for the first time. You probably rehearsed what you were going to say. You thought about the image you wanted to project. You put on the outfit that made you feel like you could get away with being just a little bit more polished than you usually are. And maybe it worked on the surface. Maybe they thought you were charming or witty or put together. But underneath, you probably felt exhausted because the acting confident drains you. You're constantly scanning for cues. Did they laugh at the right moment? Did they notice the tremor in my hand? Did I pause too long before answering? You're living outside yourself, trying to keep control over how you appear. Now, think of a different moment. One where you weren't performing at all. Maybe you were laughing with a friend until your stomach hurt. Maybe you were explaining something you care about deeply and forgot to worry about how it sounded. Maybe you were simply sitting quietly, not needing to fill the space and realizing the other person looked more comfortable because you weren't scrambling to entertain them. In those moments, you weren't acting confident. You were being ironically, that's when people felt most drawn to you. Being carries a kind of ease that acting never will. Acting says, I need you to see Miss Sneaky Test number 2 explained in a certain way so I can feel okay. Being says, I'm already okay, and you're welcome to see me as I am. Acting is fragile. It can crack with one wrong move. One poorly timed silence. One slip of the tongue. Being is steady. It can absorb mistakes without crumbling because mistakes aren't a threat when you're not performing. This doesn't mean confidence means never preparing, never caring what others think, or always feeling at peace. We're human. We care. Of course we do. But there's a difference between caring and depending. When you're acting, your sense of worth depends on how well the act lands. When you're being, your worth doesn't hang in the balance. You still care about connection, but you aren't bargaining for your value. What people often miss is that acting confident usually makes others feel uneasy. They might not know why, but something feels off. Maybe you're smiling too wide, or your jokes feel rehearsed, or your voice is a little too polished. Humans are sensitive to incongruence. We can feel when someone's outside doesn't match their inside, and when that happens, trust erodes. You might have impressed them, but you didn't let them in. On the other hand, being raw, messy, unpolished creates trust. When you admit you're nervous, people relax because now they don't have to pretend either. When you pause because you need a moment to find your words and you don't rush to fill the silence, people feel your presence more deeply. When you laugh at yourself without shame, people see your steadiness and they're drawn to it because it gives them permission to stop acting too. I once knew someone who described confidence as walking into a room and not needing to take up space. At first, that sounded counterintuitive. Don't confident people command the room? But what he meant was this. When you're acting, you need everyone to notice you because their attention is what makes you feel valid. When you're being, you don't need to demand anything. You can take up space naturally simply by existing. And ironically, that's when people notice you more. Not because you force them to, but because they're drawn to the ease you radiate. Think about the people in your life you consider truly confident. Chances are they aren't the loudest ones. They aren't the ones constantly proving themselves. They're the ones who listen with genuine attention, who admit when they're wrong, who don't flinch at imperfection. They don't make you feel like you're watching a performance. They make you feel like you're sharing a moment. So how do you move from acting to being? You start benetizing the script. We all carry a script of who we think we need to be. The strong one, the smart one, the funny one, the agreeable one. Confidence tests. Those moments when someone teases you, challenges you, or leaves space for a hidden purpose behind her actions how you to squirm are where the script usually comes out. You feel the urge to perform, to protect yourself, to prove something. But if you can pause there, if you can breathe instead of reaching for the rehearsed line, you'll notice something. You don't actually need the script. The moment doesn't collapse if you set it down. That pause is where Bing lives. It's where you get to choose presence over performance. And it takes practice because the world rewards performance. It claps for the polished act. It praises the rehearsed charm. But the people who really matter, the ones who want to know you and not your mask, they're waiting for something else. They're waiting for the courage of your being. It might feel counterintuitive at first. Maybe you worry that if you stop acting, you'll be exposed as inadequate. But what if inadequacy isn't the thing to fear? What if letting people see your inadequacy is the very thing that makes them trust you more? The person who admits, "I'm nervous," feels far more confident than the one who pretends not to be because the first trusts himself enough to tell the truth. The second is still hostage to the act. Confidence then isn't about being invulnerable, It's about being willing to be vulnerable and still standing there. It's about saying, yes, I have doubts, yes, I feel shaky sometimes, but none of that means I have to disappear. None of that means I'm unworthy of being here. We get so caught up in thinking confidence is about impressing others that we forget. It's really about being at peace with ourselves. If you can sit with your flaws without needing to disguise them, if you can acknowledge your fears without needing to erase them, if you can let people see your humanity without rushing to fix it, that's confidence. And here's the irony. When you stop acting, when you stop managing perception, people often find you more magnetic, not less. Because what they're drawn to isn't your performance, it's your presence. It's the feeling that they're with someone who doesn't need to pretend. And that gives them permission not to pretend either. Confidence is less about acting and more about being, less about polishing and more about allowing, less about proving and more about trusting. It's not something you put on like a costume. It's something you uncover by setting the costume down. And the moment you stop trying to convince others of your worth is the moment they can finally feel it. That's the paradox. The confidence you've been chasing with all your acting, all your rehearsing, all your managing, it was never out there, It was always here waiting for you to stop performing long enough to notice. And maybe the bravest thing you'll ever do is simply let yourself be seen. Not as the character you've been perfecting, but as the person you've always been. There's a funny thing about the human mind. We often live as if we're trapped in roles we never agreed to. Sneaky test number 3 should never admit trapped in assumptions we never tested. Trapped in stories that feel absolute but were really written years ago by a younger, more frightened version of ourselves. And when life presents us with these subtle little tests, The moments when someone pushes, prods, teases, or challenges us, we feel the bars of the cage rattle. Our instinct is to grip tighter, to brace, to fight the bars hidden. But what if the test isn't truly about surviving the cage? What if it's about realizing that the door has been open all along and you can simply walk around it? Think about the times you felt cornered by someone's behavior. Maybe a partner fell silent in the middle of an argument, leaving you to stew in your own doubts. Maybe a date made a playful jab at you to see how you'd respond. Maybe a colleague raised an eyebrow at your idea in a meeting, daring you to prove yourself. Those ones feel like bars clanging shut. You tell yourself, I have to pass this. I have to prove I belong here. I have to show I'm not weak. But what if that pressure is the illusion? What if their opportunity is not to push harder against the bars, but to notice the space around them? When we feel tested, we tend to collapse back into old reflexes. For some people, it's defensiveness, snapping back, trying to reclaim ground. For others, it's retreat, withdrawing, letting the moment swallow them whole. Both of these responses make sense. They're what we learned in order to protect ourselves, but they keep us stuck inside the same small story. The defensive one lives in a world where any challenge is a threat to his worth. The withdrawing one lives in a world where any push means he should disappear. Neither of those stories are true, but they feel true because the bars feel surreal. But here's the thing. Bars can be real without being solid. You can believe you're locked in, but if you try a different path, if you pause, breathe, and step aside, you realize you were never trapped at all. These tests are really invitations to notice how you've been holding yourself prisoner and to try something different. To laugh instead of defend, to stay instead of run, to admit you don't know instead of faking expertise. Each time you do that, you're not just passing a test. You're walking out of the cage you built. What makes this so difficult is that our cages feel familiar. They're made of stories we've rehearsed since childhood. If I don't fight back, I'll be walked all over. If I don't prove myself, I'll be invisible. If I don't hide, I'll be humiliated. And so when someone presents us with a test, we don't see it as a moment of choice. We see it as confirmation that the old story is right. That's why the test feels so loaded. But what if instead you saw the test as a question mark instead of an exclamation point? What if you asked yourself, what would happen if I didn't play? By the old script this time? Sometimes the smallest shifts create the biggest openings. Imagine you're on a date and she teases you, expecting you to get flustered. You could stiffen, get defensive, or fire the mindset shift that changes everything back with something harsher. That's the script you've always known. But what if you just smile, let it land, maybe even yourself a little? Suddenly, the test isn't a trap. It's a doorway. You're not locked in the cage of needing to win. You're free to be playful, to be present, to be human. And that's infinitely more attractive than passing a test by sheer force. Or think about being in a meeting when someone acknowledges your idea. The old script might tell you, this is an attack, prove them wrong. Don't let them see weakness. But what if you leaned back instead of leaning forward? What if you said, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Let's explore it. Suddenly, the bars melt away. You're not trapped. In proving your worth, you're demonstrating it by not needing to clutch it so tightly. The beauty of these moments is that they show us how flimsy the bars really are. When you stop pushing against them, they stop pushing back. When you stop assuming you're trapped, you realize you can walk in any direction you choose. And that's the essence of real confidence. Not bulldozing through every test, but realizing you don't need to fight your way out because you were never truly locked in. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Walking around thubbers often feels scarier than rattling them because rattling them is familiar. Defending yourself, withdrawing, proving, performing. That's what you know. Walking away, softening, staying open. Those feel risky. What if you're misunderstood? What if you're judged? What if they think less of you? But maybe that's the point. These tests aren't meant to show you how strong you were at playing your old role. They're meant to show you that you don't need the role anymore, that you can survive being misunderstood, that you can be judged and still be okay, that you can let go of proving and still matter. Every time you choose to walk around the bars, you expand. You discover space you didn't realize you had. You realize that your worth isn't hanging on this one interaction, this one opinion, this only outcome. And that discovery is liberating because suddenly the tests stop feeling like traps. They start feeling like opportunities. Opportunities to rewrite your story. Opportunities to choose presence over performance. Opportunities to prove not that you're perfect, but that you're free. And here's the beautiful ripple effect. When you walk around the bars, you invite others to do the same. Your ace becomes contagious. Your willingness to laugh at yourself makes others relax. Your ability to hold steady in the face of challenge makes others feel safer around you. People stop seeing you as someone they need to test because you've shown them that you don't live in the cage. And that's magnetic. Not because you passed their test, but because you showed them that the test itself was never necessary. There will always be moments when life sets these little traps for us. A silence, a jab, an eyebrow raised just high enough to unsettle. And each time you'll feel the familiar bars, that pressure to respond a certain way, the urge to retreat or retaliate. That sneaky test number 4 that men often fail when you take a breath. And remember, the door is open. The cage is an illusion. The test isn't here to shrink you. It's here to wake you. You don't have to prove your worth in every interaction. You don't have to defend every jab or silence. You don't have to pass every test. You just have to notice at bars, smile at them, and walk around. Because the truth is, the only one keeping you inside is you. And when you realize that when you start living from that place, the world opens up in ways you couldn't imagine. The bars stop being walls. They become signposts, little reminders pointing you back to freedom. And each time you step around them, you become less of an actor in someone else's test and more of the author of your own life. So the next time you feel the bars closing in, remember, you're not trapped. You never were. The test is just a question waiting for you to answer in a new way. And the answer isn't force, it's freedom. So much of life is spent trying to get it right. The right words, the right gestures, the right timing. We're harsh in our heads before we say anything out loud. We edit ourselves in real time, trying to make sure we don't sound foolish, needy, or too much. We publish the version of ourselves that we think people will find impressive. And for a little while, it works. People might nod. They might smile. They might even seem charmed. But later, when you're alone, you feel strangely empty because deep down you know what they responded to wasn't you. It was the performance. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the way to be accepted, loved, or admired is to deliver the best act. Maybe that means being clever, always having a quick comeback. Maybe it means being agreeable, saying yes to things you didn't want to do. Maybe it means hiding parts of yourself that feel too messy, too complicated, too vulnerable. Whatever the strategy, the underlying belief is the same. If I show them who I really am, it won't be enough. So we cover it up with a version of ourselves that looks safer. The problem is safety and connection don't live in the same house. You can't perform your way into intimacy. You can't impress someone without really knowing you. Because connection isn't built on perfection. It's built on presence. People don't remember the flawless lines you delivered. They remember the moment they felt you let down your guard. They remember when you laughed so hard you forgot to care how you looked, or when you admitted you were nervous, or when you shared something that wasn't polished but was real. That's what lingers. That's what people carry with them. We've been taught that confidence means never letting the cracks show. But the truth how to pass without overthinking is the cracks are where the light gets in. When you let someone see that you didn't have it all together, you give them a gift. You give them permission to be human too. And in that space, connection grows because now you're not acting, you're relating. You're not trying to manage how they see you. You're letting them see you. Think about the conversations you cherish. Most, they're not the ones where you walked away thinking, I nailed that. They're the ones where you walked away thinking, I felt close to them. Maybe you shared a story that wasn't flattering, but was honest. Maybe you sat in silence at a jar and it didn't feel awkward. Maybe you let them comfort you instead of pretending you didn't need it. Those are the moments where the performance dropped and what replaced it was presence. Presence is messy. It means sometimes saying the wrong thing. It means sometimes stumbling over your words. It means sometimes showing emotion when you wanted to appear composed. But presence is also magnetic because when someone is with you and they can feel you're not performing, they relax. They stop waiting for the act to end and start trusting that they're seeing is real. The irony is that when we chase performance, we often get the opposite of what we want. We think we're securing admiration, but people feel the distance. They might be impressed, but they don't feel close. Performance creates applause. Connection creates belonging, and no amount of applause will fill the hunger for belonging. So what does it look like to choose connection over performance? It looks like listening more than preparing your next line. It looks like letting your body relax even if you don't know what to say. It looks like staying curious about the other person instead of worrying so much about how you're coming across. It looks like letting silence be silence instead of scrambling to fill it with noise. It looks like admitting you're unsure or that you care or that you're afraid. These don't weaken you. They root you in truth. And truth is the soil where connection grows. Of course, this is easier said than done because choosing connection means letting go of control. And for most of us, control is our safety net. We think if we can just manage perception, we can protect ourselves from rejection. But the cost of that protection is loneliness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen if all they ever meet is your performance. There's a moment in every relationship where you have to decide, do I want to be admired or do you want to be known? If you choose admiration, you'll keep performing. You'll keep the mask in place. You'll get the applause, the validation, the compliments, but it will always feel sneaky test number 5 and the ultimate response hollow because admiration is about distance. It's what people feel when they're looking up at you on a stage, not sitting next to you on the floor. If you choose being known, you risk more. You risk people not liking everything they see. You risk rejection, but you also open yourself to belonging, intimacy, to the kind of closeness where someone knows your quirks, your flaws, your unpolished edges, and still chooses you. And isn't that what we really want? Not to be applauded, but to be accepted. Not to be admired, but to be understood. Not to be flawless, but to be loved in our imperfection. That's why connection matters more than performance. Because performance might win you fans, but connection gives you family. Friends, partners, the people who stay, not because you dazzled them, but because they feel safe with you. When you begin to live from connection instead of performance, the tests of confidence that used to rattle you lose their power. A tease doesn't throw you off because you don't need to prove you can handle it. A silence doesn't terrify you because you're not scrambling to impress. A challenge doesn't unravel you because your worth isn't tied to winning. You don't need to play feral. You just need to show up. And showing up isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about bringing your whole self into the moment, even the parts that feel shaky. It's about saying, this is me, and a trust that's enough. That trust is what people feel. It's what draws them in. Not the sharpest comeback or the smoothest delivery, but the sense that you're real, that you're here, that you're not hiding behind the app. So many of us are exhausted, not because we're doing too much, but because we're pretending too much. We're carrying the weight of the role we think we have to play. And the relief, the freedom comes when we set it down. When we let ourselves be seen as we are. When we realize that connection was never about the perfect lines. It was about the courage to drop them. If you think back on the people you felt most connected to in your life, chances are it wasn't because they performed well. It was because they were honest, because they let you see their humanity, because they were willing to be present with you instead of perfect for you. That's what lingers. That's what bonds us. So maybe the question isn't, how do I look more confident? Maybe the question is, am I willing to let myself be seen? Because that's where the real confidence lies. Not in the performance, but in the presence. Not in the flawless act, but in the messy, beautiful reality of being human together. And the more you choose connection over performance, the lighter life becomes. The bars of the cage stop rattling. The pressure to get it right loosens. You realize you don't need to be the best version of yourself. You just need to be yourself. And somehow that ends up being more than enough, because people don't fall in love with act. They fall in love with the person who is brave enough to drop it. So the next time you feel that test, the question that feels loaded, the review you. Ache to ace, pause, take a breath. Remind yourself you're not auditioning for perfection. You're being invited into connection. Show up as you are, thoughtful, maybe a little nervous, wonderfully human. That's the bravest thing you can do. And who knows, that kind of presence might just make the test feel useless, because real confidence doesn't need passing. It simply is.